The year was 2374. Peace has reigned over 50 years since the defeat of the invaders from planet Phyllis. The rodent folk of the planet Eiden, having suffered devastation at the hands of their numerically, aerodynamically, and technologically superior feline foes, could only triumph through the lowest and most undetectable methods. The introduction of the voracious bacteria of Eiden proved deadly to the Phylicians. Armed with a vial of ordinary germs, the late General Gorgonzola was sent in a relatively simple rocket to land on Phyllis, and upon introducing the bacteria to the planet, destroyed practically all organisms on its surface. A necessary sacrifice for our continued civilization. Not a single sign of life would show since, including from the General. In the time since past, the remnants of Phylician technology have been adapted and mastered by our kind, and our nations, having put aside their differences in the face of extraterrestrial conflict, entered an age of stability and prosperity. This was not to last. There was no signal sent, nor a flash of light or a sonic boom, only the disparate reports of Phylician attacks from all corners of Eiden. Drones piloted remotely from beyond oblivion, armor and artillery with empty cockpits that walked despite, and a wave of sustained panic across the sea and the sand. As the greatest telecommunication experts of our time worked to locate the source of these attacks, both the terrestrial and interplanetary militaries were fully mobilized, every willing and able-bodied rodent called to arms. And with the memory of the previous war still clawing at our minds, the vast majority were more than willing, most of all myself.
Hey, we've got another field mass coming.
Who's this one, Lieutenant Lindsay?
Why does it matter? We do the same thing to all of them.
Come on, don't say that. He's a living, breathing rodent like you or me.
He's already under anesthesia, so he can't hear us. Why do you even care about it?
He's under anesthesia and his tail twitches when we remove his arm. Is that normal?
Yeah, involuntary reflexes, first grade.
Can't imagine how much it costs for us to install energy rifles into every soldier's body. I mean, are we even gonna give him artificial arms when he gets back?
Gets back. Good one, pal.
Standing in line, our squadron, equipped with arm cannons and magnetic propulsion suits, stood still in the aerial hangar above the Eulicidian Ocean. I glanced up at the communication deck and looked into Sasha's eyes, as I was required to refer to him while on duty, Signaller Shropshire. Already I had considered how, while I would be hearing his voice throughout the battle, this may well be the last I see of his face, and judging from his expression, he understood this as well as I. The thought was snatched away as sunlight seeped through the gradually opening gateway, and the troops in front of me leapt out. Having not a second to regret my being, my breath, my heartbeat, I dove forward in their wake.
Do you hear me, Lieutenant Wensleydale? Contact has been called. A swarm of drones and dropships are 12 o'clock ahead. Prepare combat formation and remain on guard. Lieutenant, an enormous foreign object has been detected, 9 o'clock to your left. Is there anything visible?
Indeed there was. On the horizon was a towering bipedal mech with a feline visage, a replica of those from 50 years back. Despite all the footage we had seen in those years since, very few were alive to remember the sheer scale of such an object. And as the titanium walker seemed to detect me, it bounded towards me, crossing the water in a matter of moments, and its staggering hull landed behind me. The monstrous machine had cut me off from the rest of my squadron. In spite of the overwhelming power of the walker, I proved too small and nimble for its beam to reach me, and as I flew within a few feet of its spindly knees, I fired both my rifles at its joint, and I brought the dreaded machine down into the murky blue beneath.
Come in, Lieutenant. Has your target been neutralized? The remainder of our squadron were encircled a few kilometers from your coordinates. It's a miracle you were cut off and survived on your own. The remnants of a handful of decimated squadrons have been regrouped into a force to break through the enemy lines and investigate Felis. A signal has been pinpointed coming from there. There's no saying what could be happening in that wasteland of the planet, but the survival of our civilization may depend on it. Let's switch our contact link to extra-atmospheric.
His mention of the contact link was enough to inform me of where I had to be. ZR-25, the military's only space station in orbit of Felis. I steered myself upward and made haste to exit Eiden's atmosphere, the encompassing blue dimming into an eventual black as I escaped our planet's grasp, and prepared to cross the inner asteroid ring to Felis.
Lieutenant. We've detected an anomalous radio wave being emitted from a large space rock in your vicinity, 12 o'clock ahead. There's something inside there. Most likely an ambush. Engage in anti-foxhole tactics.
I identified the asteroid, 12 times the size of me, and spotted a number of holes on its surface, no doubt an exit for enemy drones. I took aim and fired. But where I expected a flood of Phrygian fighters to escape the asteroid, I instead witnessed a multitude of metallic appendages emerging from each pit, each one quickly pinpointing me. Instantly I evaded to the left, as a network of lasers pierced my last location, and the tentacles took aim once more. Plated appendages resisted any shot I fired, even ones directly at their bases or the tips of their cannons. Although there was no disabling the offensive capabilities of this machine, I spotted numerous cameras on the surface of a rock, nestled in smaller dips and trenches. Once I destroyed these, the lasers lost all their aim, and eventually each of them turned in towards the rock and fired. The asteroid glowed red, then white, and shortly the entire machine detonated. Dodging its debris, I boldly resumed my passage through the belt and entered the orbit of Phalis. But upon arriving at ZR-25, I found the station in a complete wreck, while not a single other soldier was in sight. I could only sigh and count myself lucky I had been late. There was no telling what could be waiting on Phalis, but despite my lack of a squadron, I had been assigned the mission of investigating the planet, and I intended to do so. So I clung to the hope that my isolated state would prevent my detection. As I descended to the planet's surface, crossing into the wasteland at the line of the planet's dusk, there was a somewhat large mass of Phrygian machines in the distance, as if they were patrolling and defending a particular spot. There certainly had to be something important there, but I had no time to call for reinforcements as the mass disseminated about the sky and darted in my direction, flying above the grassless ground and the fleshless bones of the enormous cats who patrolled them so long ago. I took cover in the hollow caves beneath the rocks, activated torchlights, prepared to engage in guerrilla tactics.
Lieutenant, we've been trying to reach you for the last 24 minutes. We were about to order withdrawal and you... Why are you still down there?
I told him I was under siege.
If it occupies the enemy, then it might distract from their attacks on Aiden, but you can't stay there. You have to withdraw immediately or it'll... Hang on. We're detecting a mass movement away from Thalos. The enemy appears to be withdrawing.
I peered out the exit of the cabin and saw a massive movement of drones out of the atmosphere. As I waded through their retreat, I noticed an unsightly sight. A fully assembled Philesian skeleton was crouched at one end of the cave, taking up the entire corner, unmoving, utterly and completely still. But it wasn't there the last time I looked. I stood and stared for 5 minutes as the drone swarm cleared out of sight. I waited another 5, still staring, with not a single movement from the bones in front of me. I slowly flew out of the cave, eyes fixated on the skeleton. The moment I was out in the air, I glanced back at the exit, and there it was, the skull sitting in the exit, peering at me. And then it lunged at me. Despite lacking any weaponry, the towering, reanimated bones were fierce, and every time I blasted a joint off, it would reattach, or be replaced with pieces of another nearby corpse. I was quickly exhausting myself as it chased me down, its slashing and biting refusing to cease, and I had no chance to even question how such a corpse had reanimated. Running out of stamina, and the prospect of my survival withering, I activated practically every device on my suit, hoping something would happen. And as I activated the signal jammer, miraculously, the entire skeleton seemed to falter, halt, and shaking in the spot. Slowly, it collapsed in on itself. I paused in confusion for a moment, before realizing what had happened. The skeleton must have been piloted by a network of nanomachines moving in sync, producing the illusion of a living, vicious skeletal Philesian spirit. With its self-communication jammed, there was nothing this artificial hive mind could do, although the jammer's power supply would surely deplete entirely soon. I had to leave immediately. My mission remained to find out if anything on this planet was causing the sudden influx of automated Phrygian attacks. With the enemy having long evacuated, I flew to the spot they had previously guarded, and saw that it was a large, empty launch pad of sorts. It was like a crater, unlike any launch pad I had seen, dotted with Phrygian numerals and devices, and points from which whatever massive starship must have been here docked, and later detached from. It was as if there had been an entire enemy base here that had simply launched itself and left long ago.
Lieutenant! We've decrypted and pinpointed the source and target of the majority of the Phrygian signals, and we've determined the enemy's central command. Despite its harsh conditions, every communication and attack seems to trace back to Moetis, and from the direct center of its harshest million-year storm. All previous doubts about the viability of stationing an interplanetary army on a gas giant can no longer stand. However they've managed to survive there, for however long they have, there is no other location the enemy command could possibly lie. Our entire space force is occupied in holding off the attacks in Eiden. As far as we're aware, you are the last soldier behind the Phrygian front line, Lieutenant. You must assault Moetis directly. To keep this attack as covert as possible, you will have to fly past the surface of the sun to cross our system towards Moetis. As far as we're aware, not a single enemy vessel can withstand its heat to the degree your propulsion suit can. But remain on guard as always.
Although our armor had indeed been outfitted with heat redirection fields, both for warmth in space and cooling in extreme heat environments, flying so close to a star was only theoretically possible, and the flares and spurts constantly bursting from its surface would destroy that field in an instant. Of course, an order was an order, and if Mission Control had really determined it to be safer than passing through enemy lines directly, I had little choice but to trust them. So I prepared my heat regulation devices and launched off fearless, plotting my direction just past the sun. Before long, I was gliding mere meters above the flames. I pressed forward at maximum speed, minimizing my time spent here as much as possible as I continued to weave through flame and fire, only for a flurry of bright red beads to shower from above. Had I not looked up, there would have been no chance of the slightest to survive. These weren't heated pieces of plasma. From the looks of things, they were bullets, burning up as they fell through the chromosphere. As I turned to survey my surroundings, I beheld a hull that looked to be immeasurably dense, with an arsenal of cannons resembling pins in a cushion, slowly retracting from the metal beast. and the entire thing submerged itself under the heap. I raised my rifles and prepared for its next ascent. The invulnerable hull of a solar submarine opened, I fired as many shots as I could manage before the bullet rain would descend again, taking out a few more cannons each round before the entire arsenal was blasted bare. The inner machinery opens itself up, revealing a third layer, one large honeycomb-like set of cannons which fired incessantly at my location. Avoiding the onslaught, I fired at the base of the cannon until it fell apart, wedging itself in the closing mechanism of the machine. It lowered into the sun once more, only now it failed to shield itself from the intense heat beneath the surface. The machine did not rise again afterwards. It wasn't long after that I passed the sun entirely, and continued my route to Moetis, which was relatively tranquil, though I reminded myself not to lose myself in monotony, and be prepared for anything. It was not until Moetis was in sight, and I approached its outer rings, that I was finally met with resistance. Planetary garrison, caught by surprise it seemed, engaged me, and their movements and attacks grew far more risky and desperate.
Lieutenant, we've detected... Oh dear.
I had already noticed it long before Signaler's shropship pointed it out, but its signal must have been so strong as to show him exactly what it was before me. A titanic battleship, larger than even those of Philesian warships from the past war. This was undoubtedly the enemy flagship, stationed to defend their base from anything imaginable, and it had cut me off directly. The entirety of its weaponry was aimed at me. Realistically, I was already dead, but if I was to attack the enemy base directly, attacking the flagship was not entirely out of the question. The ship was invulnerable to any attack I could manage, so I had little choice but to be in constant movement as I evaded the lasers and blasts and missiles of the ship. All I could do was disable each weapon individually by shooting them directly in their nozzles. But eventually I had destroyed every single cannon. The ship continued to move and function, but having no weaponry to speak of and moving too slowly to ram me, I simply left it to float as a husk in the orbit of Oatis.
Lieutenant, do you hear me? The majority of targets around Oatis have been neutralized. The way into the planet's atmosphere should be accessible now, though the harshness of the storm seems worse than ever. Your suit should be able to withstand its winds, to a degree, but our communications will be unable to pierce the thick turbulence beneath the clouds. Be ready for anything, and do everything you can. Your survival is our species' survival. Good luck, Lieutenant Winsleydale. I love you.
He was cut off as I descended into the thickness of the atmosphere, my heart almost thankful that those last words were cut off, words I would not be able to bear. As thunder and fury surrounded me, I descended yet further into the beige mist, and fired at any stray object that came my way. It was time to finish everything. dark mass slowly faded into view beneath me, one far larger than ever imaginable. And yet as I assessed it, it was clear to me that this was the same size and shape as the launch crater I had seen on Phalis. This was unmistakably the enemy base, and I was unmistakably its number one target, with everything imaginable now pointing at me. I nevertheless descended even faster than before, so running now would be even more dangerous, and I soon glided about on its surface. Circling a large hatch covered in cannons, which I assumed to be a guarded entrance. After all the local weaponry was destroyed, the hatch opened to reveal a laser cannon which occupied the entire valve. Seeing, hearing, and feeling the vibration of its charge, and knowing that it would likely clear out anything remotely close to it through shockwave alone, I gave up any caution and dove into it, and as intuition would reveal, there was a side hole I could simply duck and dive into. By the time the deafening roar of a beam was heard, I had already breached the machine. I plunged through its narrow corridors, drones and ships all barreling towards me, turrets on each wall, floor and ceiling, and a center of this immense mechanical body felt itself to be in as much danger as I. Though I passed every defense mounted against me, the machine extended further than I could assess. Each near miss of a bullet, laser or wall felt closer than the last. But amidst the chaos, as a door shut behind and in front of me, the whole facility suddenly fell silent. All I could do was float in place, my rifles held in front of me, waiting. It was as if the enemy had suddenly decided to spare me, or suddenly bargain with my survival. An armistice with cold, lifeless metal? It was unthinkable. I blasted the next door open, and in the next room I saw the most sorrowful thing I had ever regretted seeing. Atop a mess of armored wires and weaponry was the body of a mouse, missing its limbs, its torso embedded into the mechanical wall, ears drooping. The body was so dilapidated that it was several seconds after seeing the large scar over its eye that I finally knew who it was. My train of thought was interrupted by the voice over my receiver.
Disgraceful to think a loyal soldier would take so long to recognize his general.
The words of the heroic sacrifice of 50 years back circled inside my skull, though his body was motionless as his eyes forced themselves open.
I do not feel the need to explain my circumstances. I only seek to offer you what I am.
He paused, waiting for my response, but I was stunned into silence.
Very well, if you do not understand, Lieutenant, I will explain. After having administered materia to Phyllis and being left to die there, I wandered for days and came upon the ship we both inhabit now. Within this vessel, I discovered a machine intelligence surpassing any proteus before it, and recognizing my doomed plight, it gave me the instructions and assistance necessary to synthesize my body with its circuitry. I attained immortality.
His head lowered towards me, looking as if it would crumble and fall off of his bones.
When you decide to live forever, you come into that decision, knowing my new body would be destroyed if activity was detected by my former fellow mice. I belonged in this machine to bolt to hide beneath its clouds until I could gather the resources required to defend myself. But even with this acquired body, I can only muster so large of an army. One day, the people of Eiden would grow powerful enough to destroy me in any scenario. Is it not fair to fight for my own survival?
Processing his words, I shook my head. I told him he could have simply communicated directly with Eiden, explained his situation, and returned in peace, cooperating with his newfound technology and saving himself and all of us.
There is something you do not understand. I am not a machine any longer. This mind is now one with the machinery, and I no longer have any aimless loyalty to your species. I had freed from such attachments, and thus I was in too deep not to start this war for my own survival. It seems that you, too, are in too deep now. You are entirely encircled and barely alive, Lieutenant. But I admire your tenacity to have come so far. You remind me of my youth. No longer will you feel the foolish, selfless loyalty to rodent kind. I will let you join the machinery around us, as I did decades ago. You will have eternal life and not a single fear.
I stood, took a breath, and glared at him. And I told him then and there that the difference between us was that I do not fear death. If I had feared death, I would have never come this far in the first place. I had people I loved on Eiden, and they were going to live.
The tenacity of youth. You will understand when you are my age. Oh, wait, I forgot. Your refusal means that you will die within approximately 10 seconds. Quite an anti-climax.
In an instant he was shielded, and the entire room was plastered in weaponry. Evading the relentless barrage from all angles, I slowly blasted and uncovered the cockpit of the room, in which General Gorgonzola lay still. His pupil twitched as I aimed at him, and as I shot, I pierced the traitor's body. And in a few seconds, the metal shell fell apart, and all the cannons around me began to fire in haphazard directions, the lighting of the room flickering and freezing, blanketing the two of us in dimness. As the emergency lights blared, I saw Gorgonzola shut his eyes, slump out of the cockpit, and fall to the floor, blood and sparks coming from the holes in his torso. Amid hacking and wheezing, he mouthed something or another, looking at me with fear and regret, though I could not take off my helmet to hear a single word. In those last few seconds, a glimmer of humanity escaped between the scar that danced around his eye, although he hardly deserved such humanity at this point. Then the eye closed for good. And with the fall of the general came the fall of the entire facility. Sirens screaming, creaks and drones, the walls shuddering and toppling, and a wall of fire claiming the interior, advancing towards me, surely deeming to swallow me. There was no point in trying to stay ahead of it, but there was nothing to do but try anyways. 6 hours suspended in space. I finally revived in a loading bay somewhere in the solar system. I was told that I had been fab-orbiting Moetus, and that my magnetic propulsion field had failed. They assumed I had been knocked unconscious due to excess G-force, and I nodded along, only telling them what they needed to hear. The machine beneath the clouds of Moetus had been destroyed, and I had returned safely. Every Philesian drone, mech, and ship was now disabled and adrift, with no signals emerging from the stormy planet. The threat had been neutralized. We had won. They finally removed my arm rifles and replaced them with a set of artificial arms and hands. By the time we arrived at Eiden, I was paraded through the streets as if it had not been mere luck that I accomplished what I did. The entire event is cloudy looking back. My mind was entirely preoccupied with the General, the things he said, the things he did, the things I thought he was before. Of course, I had never met him until now, but who's to say he was even there? What if he was just some sort of physical construct produced by the machinery, some sort of puppet? Could I know if that was the same Gorgonzola? But there are so many questions to be asked, but nobody to ask them to. Of course, if I had let it drive me insane, then the Philesians would have defeated me in the end, so I thought about it less and less over time. Holstering my rifles for good, Sasha and I bought a cottage at the edge of the Elusidian Ocean, and I gave little thought to that which thinking would never resolve. The sounds and imagery of beams and gunfire would fade into black as I awakened each day to bowl of porridge from someone special.
Hello, Oliver. Do you know what day it is? Just 1 year ago, you saved our entire species. That's worth some porridge in the morning, isn't it? I'll always be beyond thankful for your bravery, dear. Just as we all were to the late General. You truly are his successor.
Am I now?
Well, you surpassed him, if you ask me. But perhaps I'm a bit biased.
He kissed me on the cheek and left me to view the porridge bowl in all its milky glory. Maybe the nature of the universe doesn't matter if I get a kiss on the cheek every morning.